Hello dear students, I am Dr. Surendra K. Singh, Faculty of Sociology, teaching sociology for more than 2 decades, almost 24-25 years. Now particularly, the purpose of me coming to you was basically to make you revise and also understand the group of the sociological thinkers. With the 6 videos, they are separate right from Karl Marx to Emile Durkheim to Max Weber to Talcott Parsons to Merton to Mead. The videos, 6 videos which you will be getting access to has been done in a 1.5 hour or somewhere 2 hours kind of things. So that once you start watching the videos, you would not only be able to revise, but would also be able to get the certain newer dimensions of explanation of the sociological thinkers. In the last 24-25 years of my teaching, I have always said that anyone who has opted sociology in civils, he should be very comfortable, he should be very updated on the sociological thinkers. The heart and soul, I call them heart and soul of the sociology syllabus. Almost all the units, right from the unit 2 to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the first paper and also in the second paper, we find about the application of these thinkers. So your prime concern should be the 6 thinkers. And almost all those who will be taking mains this year, 2025. Still you have more than a month. You just go through these 6 videos on the thinkers, where I have tried you not to talk only the thinkers, the themes which have been written in the syllabus. But the basic idea was to make you understand what was the socio-historical background within which the themes which have been there in the syllabus that emerged out. So right from Karl Marx to G.H. Mead, the socio-historical background has been talked about. We sometimes do not go to the base of the thinkers. We do not try to understand the group of the thinkers. No thinker is a wild plant who grows anywhere. Every thinker seems to be the product of his own time. And thus, those social, economic, political, historical conditions needs to be understood to understand the thinkers. What we basically do that we only go through what has been written in the syllabus. And sometimes when the question comes, that what inspired Durkheim to pick up division of labors, if such kind of questions come out. And even in the Weber, they talked about that how the historical conditions of Europe related that with the bureaucracy. Somewhere you need to go through this socio-historical background. So in this, the series of the 6 videos, one I'm also planning to talk about in terms of, because I'm getting the request from some of the students of the mains. Particularly the second paper, part B, unit 4 in terms of classes in India. The industrial class, the agrarian class and the middle class. Now the purpose was there because when I was talking about so many students, I told them that when you approach these classes in India, you basically talk about the basics without introducing the sociological perspectives in terms of structuralism, structural functionalism, structural Marxism, modernistic, K.L. Sharma's view. So that could be at another dimension, so to make you understand how to approach the second paper. But these 6 videos in the series would be basically making you not only understand the thinkers, their comparison. And in between, I have also talked about that why this PYQ has come out. Previous year questions have been raised. And what was the basic dimension that has to be opened up in these PYQs. Now, the purpose of this series of videos, once again I am saying, is not only to make you understand how to approach thinkers, but to improve and fetch more marks. The sociological perspectives has to be developed. And either I am talking as a teacher or I am talking like a mentor to you. The goal of both is same. I want you to succeed, you want the success in your civils, with the good marks. So this will help you understand this very important unit. And that way the 6 videos will be coming out right from all the 6 thinkers. And in between, you just go through it, look at the PYQs, and I promise that almost all the PYQs will be done from there. I wish all of you the best of luck. Feel privileged that you are taking mains. All right? You have enough time. Manage your time. Don't lose your heart. And sleep well. All right? You have done up to here, you have prepared, and you have prepared hard. So sometimes the certain kind of feeling, creepy feeling comes out, certain kind of desperation comes out. Don't let it get on you. All right? Once again, I'm wishing all of you the best of luck. Enjoy this. And I promise you this, these 6 videos will be helpful to you. Even those who have not gone, not feeling comfortable. If you listen this one, if you watch this one, you would be more comfortable. Since there are 6 thinkers, the 3 concept classes will be coming out on the thinkers. And I told you very first day that if you want to get certain kind of comfortability and confidence in sociology, you should be very comfortable with the thinkers unit 4, the heart and soul of the sociology syllabus. And as the day passes by, you would be realizing that not only these thinkers which are there in unit 3, unit 4, from where the maximum questions come in a first paper, but their ideas would also be used in a different kind of units right from the unit 5 to 10 and also in the second paper. So in a very brief kind of account, though not forgetting the essence, we'll be talking about the 2 scholars today. And I told you that thinkers are not to be treated like a monster. What you basically need is to go to the base of the thinkers, that socio-historical condition or background within which the thinker was. So the social, economic, political conditions, intellectual debates which were going around him at that time, you need to understand that. And I had quoted you the Marx, that thinkers are not the wild plants who will grow anywhere. Thinkers are the product of their own time. Thinkers are the product of their own social context. Hence, when you will approach the 6 thinkers, and we will also be trying to understand that why the certain kind of change in a methodological perspectives have taken place, you need to go through that socio-historical condition in which you would only be, or you would be able to understand what the thinkers are said or have said, what they are saying. That part has to be understood first without being critical. I have always said, and I have always believed, that critics are more learned than the scholar. Those who not only know the entire thought process of the critics, their themes, sub-themes, their concepts, their methodology, but beyond that, they are also trying to understand that where the limitations of the thinkers are there. So once you become a critic, you need to remember that time has changed, the social structure has changed, and how at your time, when you are in 21st century, 2025, how the thinkers who had said whatever the concepts and the themes they have talked about, whether they have the relevance or not, that has to be talked by you. All right? थोड़ा स्लो हूँ, ऑफ लेट, बहुत गर्मी है बेटा दिल्ली में, ठीक नहीं है हालत. And I was waiting for the result to come out so that I'll continue with your Q&A. But ultimately, I decided let the result come out within a day or 2. But let's begin, because this is almost 1 week that we have not talked about, and I'm sorry for that one. But since we had met with the mentorship in terms of the Google Meet, I had said you that the last Sunday there will be no test. This Sunday there will be test on thinkers. Whatever you have read, just approach that one so that I will be talking about to you on a Sunday as well. Once you have done it, we'll be talking about the mentorship kind of perspectives. Mind are your keep noting down certain questions wherever the problems on the thinkers so that I can pick up and accordingly I can discuss before your test. So on Saturday, I'm once again planning to have a mentorship which I had promised that every week for almost some time we'll be having the one-to-one mentorship kind of perspective so that you would be getting confidence in terms of this one. Let me pick up the first scholar, that is basically Karl Marx. We'll be talking to Karl Marx and Durkheim today. Now here we are talking about the socio-historical background. How this socio-historical background has to be looked at. It means Marxian life coincided with the first changes in European countries from agrarian to industrial society. Now, the moment you are looking at the first change, what the entire Europe has just started witnessing in terms of the transition from agrarian to industrial, we will be finding about that how the industrial society or industrial setup, a new social class that emerged, that is basically called working class. It means in this change, transformation, there is an emergence of working class, which is at the base of the Marxian analysis. And then impact of French Revolution, precisely later revolutions of 1830 and 1848. Why we are picking up this 1830 and 1848? In this revolution, the two changes become the more important. There emerges a bourgeois class, but there also emerge anti-bourgeois socialist left ideology. And the idea surfaced that one day the workers will grab power. So the very idea of socialism that has started emerging out in the later revolutions of the France, which will be having an influential impact on a Marxian analysis. So establishment of the bourgeois society, but also emergence of the anti-bourgeois socialist left ideology. And then we'll be finding about number C, impact of Hegel, from whom he will be drawing the idea of dialectics, though he will be rejecting the dialectical idealism of Hegel and will be replacing it with the historical materialism or dialectical materialism. So the three scholars seems to be the more important one. I don't know how we'll be taking this line of mine. I say that there is nothing new in a Marxian theory. Rather, Marx seems to be such a clever mason that he collects the bricks from every mason's yard and erects his own house, his own building, which today we call Marxism. So the three scholars, Hegel, Saint-Simon and Adam Smith. The idea of socialism, though not conforming to what Simons and others have said, Charles Fourier, Robert Owen, the idea of socialism has been there. prior to Marx as well. And from the British politico-economic system, the ideas on capitalism from the Adam Smiths, that would be the most important dimension. All right. And particularly the impact of British politico-economic system. So here we are talking about the impact of British politico-economic system, precisely their law of labor theory of value. You know, sometimes when you read Marx, or any one of you whosoever has gone Marx, is talking about the concept of surplus value. The very emergence of the concept of surplus value of Marx has to be viewed within the labor theory of value what the British politico-economic system has propagated. The labor theory of value basically said that the price of a commodity is determined by the amount of work gone into it. I repeat, the price of a commodity is determined by the quantity of work gone into it. Now when Marx comes, Marx said they are not telling the truth. My economic friends are not telling you the truth. Before the production begins, some amount has already been invested in terms of opening up the factories, wear and tear, machines. And then certain value has been added in the process of production. In which simply theory of surplus value is what worker produces and what worker gets has a difference, which conceptually we are looking in terms of the difference between the use or necessary value and exchange value. And the political change that has started taking place, or the certain important events that have started taking place in the world scenario in terms of technological changes, political struggles, this would be the E point. So in a very brief, we need to know about this one, in which this is the most important. Hegel from the Dialectics, St. Simon the idea of socialism, and Adam Smith from where we will be finding about the certain change in the interpretation of capitalism in a Marxian perspective. And once we talk about the Hegel particularly, we will be finding about the materialistic interpretation of history, popularly called historical materialism. So this is the socio-historical base, background. And then you look at the themes like modes of production, which are written in your syllabus, dear. Alienation, class struggle, and then criticism and evaluation. This is the format. You try to approach the thinkers on this perspective. I hope you remember that the moment first day I talked about in terms of how sociology is to be approached. I talked about the three words: theme, concept, and methodology. Now when we're talking about this one, you just try to know what are the themes, like we say, modes of production. Talk about the modes of production in terms of different historical periods and the evolution of the Western society in terms of primitive communism to ancient slave society to the feudal society, to the capitalist society, and the future projection of Marx in terms of the socialist society and the communist mode of production, in which we will be talking about these are the concepts. We will be talking about the dominant group. We will be talking about the concept of forces of production, relations of production, infrastructure, suprastructure dichotomy. Pick up this dimension. The background of social revolution. And I always say that you pick up Marx. Either you begin with the modes of production, or you pick up class struggle, you talk about social stratification, or you talk about alienation. From wherever you begin, you come to the same. Every dimension has to be opened up. So once you pick up the modes of production, find out what are the concepts which needs to be taught in your answer. And then what is the method, whether we're talking about the materialistic interpretation of history, that is called, popularly called, historical materialism. All right. Which you would understand only when you have understood the dialectical idealism of Hegel. In this very perspective, dialectics plus history, along with the materialistic analysis of history, will become the base on which the methodological debate of Marx that has to be talked about. It is a matter or the material reality which is the base of any change, Marx argues. If you are talking about any change, then it is a matter of materialistic base or materialistic reality that will become the base of change. All institutions of human society are outgrowth of this economic activity, in which you will be able to place infrastructure, suprastructure dichotomy. Thoughts and social institutions developed only as a superstructure founded on economic infrastructure. Material condition affects society's structure and development. So the material condition comprise productions in which the two components, forces of production and relations of productions, are the important. Evolution of society from one stage to another while interpreting on materialistic basis is the strength of the Marxian analysis. Thus I said, when we are talking about Marxian perspective, right, not denying the fact that over the centuries Marx or Marxism has basically witnessed a debate, criticism from within and from outside. In a Marxian theory, we basically witness the impact of ideological triangulation of Saint-Simon, Hegel and Adam Smith. So Hegel's socialism, the Saint-Simon socialism, Hegel's dialectics, and economic analysis of Adam Smith, which Marx synthesized to construct his own theoretical methodological model, which still has its reverberations in the contemporary world. As a matter of fact, Marxian ideas remains to be one of the dominant theme in the contemporary social, political and economic discourse narratives, which reflects its impact on the intellectuals of various disciplines. And almost every social science humanity, somehow or other, seems to be influenced by the ideas of Marx. But irony being that since its impact could be found reaching to the different branches of the social science, according to the demands and perspectives of the social sciences need, the various scholars belonging to the different disciplines have utilized Marx as it suited them. It reminds me the sentence of Irving Jetlin, that Marx is a huge elephant explained by few blinds. Whatever came in their hand, they considered that to be the only reality. So either that be the sociologist, either that be the economist, either that be the political scientist, either that be the philosophy. Whatever came in their hand, they considered that to be the only reality. No. You need to open your eyes to see the hugeness of his thought, the hugeness of the Marxist or Marxism. His ideas are so diverse, so in-depth, that you need to understand Marx in a totality. And at the same time, broadly if you look at, there was a period and still that is the way the categorization of the nations have been done in terms of first world, second world, more precisely in terms of capitalist and the socialist kind of perspective. It seems that to some nations where the socialism has been professed, Marx seems to be Messiah. And where the capitalism has flourished, Marx is viewed with a certain kind of suspicion. Now, if I could quote Professor Seligman, he says emotions are to be thrown away from the window to understand the totality of Marx. Neither you need to look Marx as a Messiah, nor you need to look Marx from the certain kind of suspicion. You need to understand Marx in a holistic dimension. Despite certain kind of debate surrounding the Marxist analysis, in a contemporary world, Marxism stands as a scientific theory, a revolutionary program, a progressive movement, a socio-political ideology expressed by millions of people who consider his ideas with optimism and a ray of hope. Those who are crushed, those who are exploited, those who have been denied their voices. It seems that Marxism is a panacea which will be addressing their all anomalies, their all problems. Every notion of inequality is injustice that will be addressed through the Marxism. This kind of optimism and a ray of hope is there. Marxism is a scientific, because it not only interprets the materialistic history of the world, but also underlying the way to transform it. And thus we might have come across the line that philosophers have always talked of change. It's now time to change the society. Alright? If something which has been created by the man, then God is not going to transcend on earth to solve it. It is a man-made. Man has created the history. So if there is any anomaly in the course of history, it is the man who has to rectify it. Philosophers have talked of change. Now this is a time to society. Hence I am saying that Marxism seems to be scientific. That it not only provides the materialistic interpretation of the world, but also the way to transform it. History is not going to take its own course. No fatalism is there in Marx. And neither Marx is appealing to any conscience of the capitalist. What has been somewhere in the writings of the British political system. No, neither Marx believes in the fatalistic history, that history will take its own course. Neither is appealing to the conscience of the capitalist. I is simply saying that if it is the creation of man, man will have to take the initiatives. So history is the creation of man. And if any change is to be required, has to be brought. It has to be brought by men. And thus he writes that philosophers have always talked of change. Now this is the time to change the society, within which his concept of class struggle becomes the moving force in history. What makes history move? And the moment you are answering this question, what makes history move, you will be basically coming to the class struggle. And thus he comments that entire human history is hitherto the history of a class struggle. These are kind of questions which are coming to you, dear, that you need to talk about. You know the certain limitations of the Q&A, but I told you that I'll be talking about everything. All right, I'll be giving you the certain kind of glimpses so that you will be able to understand, you will be able to approach how to view that one. Marxism has received many challenges. I said, not from outside, but also from within. Acton calls it as an illusion to the epoch. Karl Popper refers it to be an utopian engineering. Raymond Aron calls it opium to the intellectuals. And Hunt refers it as an illegal and rebellious child of 19th century liberalism. Francis Fukuyama has used the phrase end of history, whereas Daniel Bell has talked about the concept that is called end of ideology. But despite these criticisms, despite the critical introspection of the certain themes what Marx has talked about, and the scholarly criticism, the fact remains that Marx is a scholar of centuries, and Marxism, rather than disintegrating, has strengthened as the time passes. So with the passage of time, with the passage of days, passage of decades, Marxism has strengthened. That way the relevance has to be talked about. Certainly, Marxian theory is so huge, so wide, that certain propositions may go wrong. But if the certain propositions prove wrong, it does not mean that Marx is a second-rated scholar. You need to understand the novelty in a Marxian theory. The theories, the concepts which are scattered in and around, how beautifully they have been integrated, and within which the newer kind of theoretical dimension that comes out, influencing almost all the nations of the world, that is called Marxism. You know, though you also need to remember that let Marx and his ideas be personalized. We do not need to impersonify his ideas. The way the certain scholars belonging to the different disciplines have done, impersonification of his ideas, and thus certain kind of rigidity that has emerged. Every theory has its own strength, every theory has its own limitations. And you should be rational enough to accept the certain limitations of the theory. If I could use the falsification, idea of falsification, concept of falsification from Karl Popper, from where the post-positivism, I have talked about Karl Popper in post-positivism. It will be one of the critic of the Marxism as well. That if you find that certain propositions of Marx are not relevant today, they need the newer kind of analysis, then you should be logical enough, not bound by the certain kind of ideology, blind enough to accept the certain kind of limitations. All right. Marxian life coincided with the changes in Europe from agraria to industria, in which we find about the emergence of working class in the factories, and this working class in a factory is a prime concern and the center of Marxian theory. Marx also incorporated the impact of the changes brought by the French Revolution of 1789, more precisely from 1830 and 1848, which not only abolished feudalism, but established bourgeois society. But with this establishment of bourgeois society, there also emerged anti-bourgeois socialist left, within which the idea surfaced that the working class will grab power and succeed in inaugurating classless society, in which the views of Saint-Simon and his socialism is imparted. But let me make one line to you so that you can remember that Marx, rather than focusing on the reform-oriented in socialism or reform orientation in socialism, emphasized on revolutionary class struggle. Marx also witnessed the impact of Hegelian dialectics and followed it to a certain extent. As a young Marx, he followed to the philosophy of Hegel, considered to be the state philosopher of the Parousia. But very soon he deviated from there. He realized that mere philosophical ideas would not lead to change. Though Marx retains Hegelian dialectics, but refutes Hegelian idealism and replaces it with the materialism. Materialistic interpretation of history is the core of the Marxian methodology, which explains, mind the line better, which explains social change and human consciousness in terms of underlying changes in the modes of production. I repeat that the materialistic interpretation of history as a philosophy explains social change and human consciousness in terms of underlying changes in the modes of production. I said Marx also witnessed the impact of British politico-economic system, in which he basically picked up the labor theory of value to arrive at the theory of surplus value, that what worker produces and what worker gets has a difference, or why worker receives only one part of the value which he produces, and that way the certain exploitative nature of the capitalism with the concept of surplus value is underlined, which is explained by the Marxian theory. All right. Marx, contrary to the British economist who focused on the capitalist society, focused on the proletariat class, the working class, and moves away from the classical economist. All right. And hence, your first focus to understand the thinkers would be the methodology. And in which, the moment you say Marxian methodology, the dialectical materialism or historical materialism, materialistic interpretation of history, then you basically need to understand that how he borrowed the concept of dialectics from the Hegel. So Marxian methodology is often referred to as the dialectical historical materialism, in which the perspective of dialectics, materialism, and history all find their analytical place. Marx argues that society can never be comprehended unless the historical forces that produce that society are taken account of, are understood. In the understanding of history, Marx borrows the concept of dialectics from Hegel and argues or agrees with Hegel that human nature has to go beyond the description for taken for granted reality. Marx says that Hegel has raised a very good question, that what makes history move? Dialectics. But his focus was more on idea. And thus, Marx retains dialectics and replaces idealism with the materialism. It means Hegel raised a good question, Marx says, but arrived at a wrong conclusion. All right. The moving force of social change is a struggle of human control over materialistic world, with which man controls and writes history. Marx disagrees with the positivists in the sense that the purpose of the method is to broaden what is already known Rather, he says, what is the purpose of method? The purpose of method is, now I am talking in unit 2 here, try to find out. The purpose of method is to basically eradicate the self-doubt, the self-delusion. And thus, Marxian dialectics or dialectivism emerges as a critic to positivism. We will be using that one in unit 2. Marx writes that all human beings are creative energy, creative agency, striving towards self-fulfillment, and history is a continuous struggle for a dominance among groups. All production for self-fulfillment. Yeah. Let me please. This is क्या हो रहा है क्यों ये I'm sorry, visually I keep my mobile off. I don't know why it is not going. And in between, no one has ever called me. So I'm sorry. Right? All productions for self-fulfillment are basically the appreciation of nature. In other words, in the course of history, man increasingly transformed nature to serve its purpose. But in the process, they also transform themselves. A struggle against nature for livelihood has always been a reality. Through associated labor, man has a struggle against nature, which makes men to create a specific mode of production with a specific social organization. Mind the line beta. Thus, one form of modes of production seems to be different from another form of production. Except primitive communism, all modes of production are characterized by social inequality. Now here you need to understand that one. So what's समझ ले बेटा? थोड़ा ज्यादा ही छोटा हो गया बेटा ये. Here we are beginning with classless society is a phase of prehistory. This is the one in which we are talking about a certain kind of class antagonism. So I say, except primitive communism, all, this is the future orientation of Marx. All means we are talking about the ancient society, feudal society, and a capitalist society. All modes of production are characterized by social inequality. As society evolved from unstratified horde, Jund, to the emergence of a stratification of men, which became possible through division of labor, in which all stratified classes are distinguished by their differential access to modes of production. So here, master, slaves, lord, serf, bourgeois, and proletariat. Alright? इन दोनों के बीच में बेटा एशियाटिक मोड ऑफ प्रोडक्शन आ जाएगा अगर ऐसा कोई क्वेश्चन हुआ तो. Alright. Now let's first understand dialectics. To Hegel, dialectics is a method of reasoning which compels mind to reflect that how imperfectly it understands itself. Thus, to Hegel, the spirit of dialectics is a spirit of negation, the principle of negation, which requires mind to go beyond the taken for granted reality. And thus, it also requires mind to go from the old form of consciousness to the new one. It also makes the mind to understand that the old form is imperfect, less satisfactory than the new one, within which we'll be talking about thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Every statement of truth is a thesis, having its opposite statement of truth, that is antithesis. At a higher plane, they collide with one another to produce synthesis. And with passage of time, the synthesis will turn to have thesis, having its opposite antithesis. So every form which you are talking about, all form, is imperfect, less satisfactory. So what dialectics is compelling you? Dialectics is basically compelling you to go beyond the taken for granted reality. All right. And here, what Hegel is now saying, that historical processes consist of some temporary stages containing contradictions, and every stage is succeeded by the new movement that negates it, transforms it, yet preserves the particular characteristics of it. The process could be understood in terms of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or you can also talk about in terms of being, not being, becoming. There are three principles: transformation from quantity to quality and quality to quality. This is the first law. The second principle of dialectics is the law of union of opposites. And the third principle of dialectics is the principle of negation. Hegel gives primacy to idea or mind, and thus his theory is called dialectical idealism, which has a philosophical doctrine, regards idea or consciousness as the essence of universe, and treats all social institution as a manifestation of prevailing idea, and the idea is real. All right. Now this dialectics is taken, borrowed by Marx. Idealism is gone. So Marx, like Hegel, believes that dialectic is a purposeful logical method being capable of demonstrating the laws of social development. But Marx argues that in Hegel's hand, dialectics went mystification, that is, standing on the head. Sirshasan kar raha hai. In the yoga, you do it Sirshasan, where the head is on the ground and the leg is on the up. So Marx argues that Hegel's hand, dialectics went mystification, that is, standing on the head. Marx puts it down on the feet, implying that Marxian dialectical materialism is Hegel's dialectical idealism upside down. Marx writes that my dialectical method is not only different from Hegel, but also in direct opposition to it, because idea is nothing but material world reflected by the human mind and translated into the forms of thought. To think, mind the lines better, to think, man has to live. To live, man has to satisfy the material needs. Hence, the first premise of all human existence and all history is that man must be in position to live. And in order to be able to make history, जिंदा नहीं है तो इतिहास क्या होगा? How the history will be made? So the premise of all human existence and all history, that man must be in position to live in order to make history. Life involves, before anything, eating, drinking, clothing, habitation, and many other thinks thus. Mind the line better. Thus, past historical act is the production of these things to satisfy these needs. It is a fundamental condition for all history. And thus Marx constructs his methodological base in a form of materialism and argues that Hegel ignores the material world in which he lives. Hegel uses the means of livelihood which permitted his mind to and body to survive with brain capable of philosophizing. Fallacy is that Hegel focuses on idea and ignores that idea is actually the product of material world. Very beginning when we studied Marx, I quoted some lines. In this context, Marx rejects the idealistic claim that idea can arise, act independently of social content. Rather, to Marx, all social phenomena and human conscience are produced by materialistic cause, and the cause lies in the economic arrangement of society, that is, modes of production. Materialism implies that in any stage of history, economic realm of society is the primary and not the idea. All historical developments are by the economic conditions. In other words, in order to make history, man needed to live first. And life before anything requires food, clothes, shelter. Manoj Kumar, roti kapda makan. The production of this materialistic need is a precondition of history. And any other phenomena, be it political, legal, religious, ideological, must be viewed on the basis of this. Therefore, to Marx, the base of society is economic, infrastructure aa gaya beta. That is infrastructure. And every other thing is secondary, that is suprastructure. Materialistic condition is key to man's social life. And changes in this process are responsible for all historical developments. Alright? History must be interpreted in this light. Alright? It means when you're talking about modes of production, it has a two component, forces of production plus relations of production, in which we'll be talking about infrastructure and suprastructure kind of thing. Modes of production is composed of two components, forces of production and relations of production. Forces of production comprise of two elements. First, means of production, that is the tools, machines, labor power, that is skills, knowledge, experience, and all other human faculties that goes in it. Whereas relations of productions are conditioned by the process of economic ownership of the means of production. Those who control it are dominant class, and those who do not control it are the dependent class. Thus, if we talk about the outline, गौर करना बेटा, पेंसिल ठीक नहीं है बेटा. यही प्राइमरी है बेटा. It's a primary. It's found in economic base, and then it has a two. We'll be talking about in terms of modes of production. The moment we talk about the economic, we are talking about modes of production, in which we are talking about forces of production and relations of production. Forces of production, I said once again, means of production, that is tools, techniques, and labor power, that is skills, knowledge, experiences. And relations of production is basically the social formation. Like in ancient slave society, we'll be finding about the master and the slaves. In a feudal society, we'll be finding about the lords and serfs. In a capitalist society, we'll be finding about bourgeois and the proletariat. And superstructure is all which is secondary, which is the legal, political, religious, or any ideology. So this is the very base within which the Marxian analysis has to be understood by you. Alright. And from there you come to the modes of production, so we have understood it. Related that how Marx, while analyzing the Western society, identifies certain phases of historical development, beginning with the primitive communism, that is a stage of prehistory, in which man was dependent on nature, was basically a consumer, not a producer. The commodities of nature were commonly owned, and whosoever provided labor received the fruits of the labor. Man was also an extension of community, and thus more than one's need was consumed by other. Therefore, there was no surplus, no exploitation. It was a classless society, a condition of prehistory and a classless society. Mind the lines. But with the development of agriculture, some men became free from the process of production. Surplus became possible, and the classes emerged. In the ancient slave society, modes of production were owned by master and slaves. Master and slaves. Labor was provided by the slaves. In the medieval feudal society, lords owned the modes of production and serf provided the labor. Whereas in the modern capitalist society, the modes of production, two principal actors became prominent. That is the owner of capital, that is bourgeois, and owner of labor, that is the proletariat. It means in every historical stage, society is divided into two antagonistic classes. The class which owned modes of production and controlled the forces of production dominated, which also perpetuated tensions and conflict. At each stage of development, the conditions determine the structure of society. Bipin, thoda AC ko upar karna. And thus, handmill gave rise to the society with the feudal lords, and steam mill gave rise to society with the industrial capitalists. The structure of society breeds or interbreeds attitudes, actions, and civilizations. Therefore, all political, intellectual, religious, legal, and theoretical outlooks that emerge in the course of history are derived from the materialistic condition of life. यहाँ से modes of production उठा लेना बेटा. यही यूनिट 6 में चला जाएगा. It will be going in unit 6. Work and economic life, like they have given the slave society, feudal society, capitalist society. Pick it the same data. The forces of capitalism heralded a new era of progress by negating the feudal system and emerged as a unique historical development. In the sense, capitalism is a negation of negation. Why I am saying negation of negation? Because capitalism negated feudalism, and feudalism had negated slave society. So capitalism emerged as a negation of negation. Look at the third principle, principle of negation. In this sense, capitalism is a negation of negation because it negated feudal society, which had negated the ancient slave society. Capitalism affected the relationship between bourgeois and the proletariat, manifesting the law of unity and opposition. That is a struggle between opposites. Capitalism emerged as a market-centric economy in which the system of production was completely different from the previous stages. Marx argues that it is the material instinct of the man which makes him engaged in the process of production. However, in capitalism, the fetishism of commodity, question hai beta, simple question hai, fetishism of commodity, charm, desire. However, the fetishism of commodity and money has become so strong that it guided men to engage in process of production, thereby making the relationship between bourgeois and proletariat inevitable. Man worships money and becomes enslaved of money. Capital में लिखता है बेटा, that man worships money and becomes enslaved of money. There is a fetish of commodity. In capitalism, goods and services are produced for sale by means of an open market, and both at the point of production and also at the point of consumption, commodities are evaluated in terms of their usefulness. However, in capitalism, commodities are not produced in the interest of fulfilling subjective needs of the people. We are not producing for the certain relatives. We are not producing for the subjective needs of others. Rather, subjectivity is manifested, or subjectivity is manipulated to accommodate production and profit. Thus, capitalism has destroyed, question hai beta, thus capitalism has destroyed the personal relationship, has replaced the ties of personal social relationship with that of mutual indifference, thereby destroying the traditional dependence among human beings. इसी को बेटा थोड़ा सा घुमा के मैन एंड वुमेन जेंडर से भी जुड़ा जा सकता है. So look at that, how capitalism has destroyed the personal relationship. In a pre-capitalist stage, human subjects were included or inclined towards one another for the maintenance and sustenance of social relationship. But it has been destroyed by capitalism. Even the relations between man and woman has been destroyed. Individuals do not recognize one another, rather see himself autonomous, determining. But truth is that he fails to understand or perceive the actual reality, which reflects false consciousness. In capitalism, commodification of labor has emerged. Labor has been turned to a commodity, implying like any other commodity, labor can be sold and bought in the market, through which capitalists produce surplus and deny the value actually created by the worker. And how is it denied? By paying the wages. The fact is that through wages, bourgeois buys the labor power, which become a means to appropriate values in the process of production. In the sense, wages actually buying of creative power of the worker to be used in the process of production. In this context, it can be said that capitalism is a social relationship between owners of capital and owners of labor, that is proletariat and bourgeois, which in its movement may seem to be commodity, product or capital. Mind the line beta. But all along its journey, it is inherent with the one quality, that is to increase the value that has gone into it, for which we talk about the law of motion of capital, to be expressed through Ep.1. M is the money invested, C is the commodity produced, M1 is the price at the market. So when a commodity is produced and sold in the market, M1 will always be greater than M. So this is called law of motion of capital. Marx further argues that in capitalism, man's ability to work has turned labor into a commodity, and in the process of production it is being used to generate profit, which Marx explains through the theory of surplus value, that why worker gets only one part of the value he creates, why there is a difference between what worker gets and what worker produces, for which I had told you to use the two concepts, that is called use or necessary value, necessity value or necessary value, and exchange value. Simply, surplus value reflects the difference between what worker produces and what he gets. The amount of labor put for survival, the amount of labor put for survival, what the worker is providing for his survival, is use or necessary value. But in the process of production, the labor produces not only for his own needs, but also produces what has exchange value in the market, on which, by expropriating the value, taking away, expropriation, appropriation, you might have gone through in economics. By expropriating the values, the capitalist appropriates the profit. This is the modus operandi in which we are talking about. However, Marx also draws our attention to the certain contradictions, like problem of realizing surplus value because the workers will be replaced by the machines, Machine can simply transfer the value that has gone into it. Alright. So there will be a problem of realizing surplus value. There is a crisis of overproduction, which would be also leading to a scaling down of the prices of the commodity. It will also be leading to the certain kind of competition among the capitalists. So monopoly and oligopoly will be emerging out. The smaller ones will side away. And there is a loss of falling tendency of rate of profit because the prices of the commodity has come down. So there is a law of falling rate of the profit. This is yet another contradiction for which the capitalists will indulge in a double dose of exploitation. And what the double dose of exploitation would be? They would not only be decreasing the wages, would also be lengthening the working hour of the workers. Suppose if the worker was earlier working for 8 hours, now he is supposed to work for 10 hours. And the wages have also come down. So we will be talking about the theory of pauperization in a class struggle. And there will emerge, thus there will consequently emerge the socio-political condition for the emergence of proletariat as a class, in which the workers first oppose machines, then individual capitalists, and then ultimately capitalism as a system. This is the historical materialism, modes of production, infrastructure, superstructure dichotomy, forces of production. In this fetishism of commodity, theory of surplus value, this all would be there. In which we now need to talk about the two further concepts, that is called alienation and class struggle. In the Marxian analysis of capitalism, or capitalist modes of production particularly, concept of alienation emerged as one of the most important phenomena and reality, reflecting socio-economic consequences of capitalism. Marx, in his political and philosophical manuscript, interprets alienation, which brings Marx very close to the domain of sociological analysis. Alienation not only manifests consequences, but also expresses the production activity associated with capitalist modes of production. It literally means estrangement, separation from the things what belongs to someone. Thus, to Marx, alienation is the experience of oneself as alien and becoming mechanical in the process of production, thereby reflecting a state of mind in response to materialistic system. यहां से उठा लेना बेटा alienation को, और ऐसा कुछ क्वेश्चन हो कि alienation. So prior to Marx, alienation was also talked by two scholars, Hegel. Labor is the man's species being, but Hegel was more in terms of the certain kind of metaphysical dimension. Objectification and concept of estrangement will be coming out. Object-subject inverse ratio would be coming out in Hegel. And there is one other scholar, Ludwig Feuerbach, Essence of Christianity. He basically talks about alienation in terms of the realism. Marx neither looks alienation from the metaphysical dimension nor from the religious dimension. Rather, he is basically looking in terms of the modes of production, the consequences, socio-economic consequences in the capitalist modes of production, and trying to understand the reality from that dimension, in which fetishism of commodity, that portion just I talked about, will be there. Commodification of labor has taken place. Labor has turned to commodity having a value. On that value, there is a necessary value and the exchange value, which will become the base for the capitalist to generate profit. Alright? And you basically need to understand the four. That Marxian perspective of alienation, there are two propositions which are the most important. The first proposition is taken from Hegel, that is, labor is man's species being. What separates man from others, other species? Labor. But Marx adds one another more into the Hegel, and he says labor is performed as a wage labor. अब जहां वेज लेबर आ गया बेटा, कॉमोडिफिकेशन ऑफ लेबर हो गया, फेटिसिज्म ऑफ कमोडिटी हो गया, सरप्लस वैल्यू एंड एक्सप्लॉयटेशन हो गया, estrangement हो गई, denying of value which belongs to someone. You take the meaning from there. All right? If the Hegel has viewed alienation in a metaphysical one and Feuerbach in a religious domain, then Marx basically views in terms of the socio-economic consequences. अब तुमको क्या याद रखना बेटा? Alienation in terms of the four, from the process of production, from the product he produces, from the community fellow men, and ultimately from himself. All right. How this capitalist mode of production has turned man into animal, animal into man, is the creativity of the man which separates him from the other species being. But when the worker is going to the process of production, his creativity is lost. He is producing for the market, he is producing what the capitalist requires. He is there only for his own survival. His creativity is gone. Man has turned to an animal. And when he is not working, when he is at home, what he is doing? Eating, drinking, sleeping, procreating. These are the functions of animals. If sometimes they ask the questions, man turns to an animal, animal turns to man. Look at it from the alienation kind of perspective. Look at how in the capitalist mode of production this alienation has taken place. And this way, you're talking about that in the capitalist modes of production, worker is lost into the machines. He's only one part of the process of production. The labor has been mechanized. His creativity is lost. He's only a part of the process of production. He's related to only for the survival. He's detached from what he produces. Competition has separated him from the community fellow men. And ultimately, there's a loss to himself. He does not live, he belongs to himself. Alright. So, आपको क्वेश्चन 6 यूनिट में होगा मोटिफाइंग वाला, the more the worker spends, the motifies his body and soul. ऐसा करके वो भी alienation का क्वेश्चन है. Look at the question bank PYQs. Alright. The more the commodity and capital are accumulated, more powerless and poor the worker begins, and less he belongs to himself. But Marx is hopeful that this condition would be eradicated. And thus, in the Marxian theory, one of the important themes that comes out is the class struggle. And the class struggle, you need to look at the corollary of the historical materialism or a materialistic interpretation of history. It's basically the history of class struggle, which could be analyzed as a corollary of historical materialism. In a Marxian analysis, class is the principal actor of historical drama of human history in general and capitalism in particular, in which class struggle is the moving force of history. In this context, Marxian theory of class, stratification में ले जाना बेटा, you take it to stratification. We'll be talking about a stratification. Marxian theory of class can be interpreted in basis of the three factors. First, the existence of class is concerned with certain historical phases in the process of production. The class struggle in capitalism would lead to dictatorship of proletariat, socialist. There is a transitory phase, and the dictatorship of proletariat is merely a transitory phase in evolution of class and evolution of classless society. In Marxian analysis, development of class is on the basis of relations of production and respective sources of income, that is property relations. Alright? However, this relationship also reveals that classes have different interests, and the class, mind the word better, the class is irreconcilable category, thereby making class struggle inevitable. In the capitalist society, there are the three principal actors: owner of land, owner of capital, and owner of labor. who respectively live by the different source. Owner of land would be by rent, owner of capital by profit, owner of labor by wages. However, to Marx, mind the lines, beta, क्या concept use करना? However, to Marx, a class to be a social class, there must be consciousness of unity. I repeat, a class to be a social class, there must be a consciousness of unity, a feeling of separation from other classes. That would develop only through class struggle. Thus, Marx writes that the entire history of mankind is basically, or hitherto, the history of a class struggle. It has always taken place in the course of history between free men and slaves, plebeians and patricians. Plebeians commoner हो गया, patricians noble हो गए, between lords and serfs, who have always carried out now hidden, now open fight, and each time ending either in terms of ruins of classes or revolutionary reconstruction of society. In capitalism, contradictions have emerged between two principal actors related to the modes of production, that is, bourgeois and the proletariat, which in the course of history will become more simple and strong, as every group will have to find their locations, or they will have to take their sides. Society would be broken into two hostile camps. The bourgeois society that has developed on the ruins of feudal society has not done away with the class antagonism, rather has established classes which, with the new form of exploitation and struggle, will end. In the course of history of human development, only when, mind the two other concepts, only when the class realizes its subjectivity, the path of class struggle is paved in, within which the two concepts, class in itself, class for itself, and a class consciousness becomes important. It means now we'll be talking about one concept that is called class consciousness. Class consciousness is talking about the transition from class in itself to class for itself, from where the questions like subjective understanding of objective reality prepare the text of a class struggle. It is not the consciousness that determines the being, rather it is the being that determines the consciousness. Look at your PYQs, will be coming from it. So, when the class realizes its subjectivity, the path of class struggle is paved in, within which the class consciousness as a concept is most significant. Where we need to remember that subjectivity will develop on the objective credit, because everyone is born in a class. Either you are a proletariat or either you are a bourgeois. So you are born in an objective class. Your class position is objective class position, on which the subjectivity in terms of class consciousness will emerge out. Subjectivity, subjective understanding of the objective reality prepares the text of the class struggle. Now, I hope you will be able to understand that question. Alright? The belief in class struggle is an essence of history that vitiate the proletariat attitude, thinking, and also making them realize their revolutionary role in the change of the system. In this context, class consciousness is the transition from class in itself to class for itself. A class becomes a class for itself through class struggle by realizing its objectivity and interest. Since Marx writes that class struggle is the essence, is the moving force of history. उसी में subjectivity, objectivity, and we are talking about the two concepts, that is class in itself and class for itself. So Marx strongly believes that historical laws of social development are determined by means of man's action and will. Through the class consciousness, class becomes aware of realizing its class position in relation to other class or vis-a-vis another class. Class in itself is merely an aggregate of workers having a common class position, reflecting a state of false consciousness, where the proletariat have failed to realize the potential nature of their interests. But the true class consciousness would ignite the class to realize its potentiality in bringing change. And thus, the transition would take place from class in itself to class for itself. This is a true consciousness. The journey will be from false consciousness to true consciousness. The transition also manifests the subjective understanding of objective reality, preparing the text of class struggle. Here Marx moves away from Hegel, his followers, and their focus on idealism, as they had highlighted that consciousness determines the being. Marx says, no, my existence is source, my being is source. Philosophers are not the wild plants will grow anywhere. They will grow in the social context. So the way the Hegelian followers have basically highlighted consciousness over being, Marx is becoming critical of that one. And what is saying? But contrary to idealism, Marx asserts that it is the being that determines the consciousness. Since materialistic existence is the prime concern in history, and every idea is the product of social idea and not the reverse. Those who have focused on the primacy of idea have not understood the complete reality of existence. Man is born into an objective class position, implying that one's existence is objective, within which develops consciousness, which happens when transition takes place from class in itself to class for itself. क्या करना बेटा, यहीं से तुमको कुछ कंसेप्ट्स उठा लेना है ये क्लास स्ट्रगल के डोमेन में. तो क्या क्या होगा उसमें बेटा? द क्लास स्ट्रगल बिगिंस विद इंपॉर्टेंस ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी, क्लास वाले में डोमेन. देन पेपराइजेशन ऑफ प्रोलेटेरिएट, exploitation, development of proletariat as a class, not on a loose aggregate. All right? Class consciousness, process of proletarization, and ultimately class struggle, which would give way to the socialist mode of production, and ultimately communism would be inaugurated. In socialism, the social structure that develops after overthrowing capitalism, the dictatorship of proletariat begins. Means of production come under social ownership. Labor is made compulsory for all able-bodied persons. Attention also shifts toward development of science and technology. So to create a condition where all social needs could be fulfilled. At this stage, rights are determined according to the rule, that is, each according to the ability and each according to work. Marx further writes that by force, proletariat would succeed in inaugurating communism. Class would disappear. Difference between mental and physical labor will disappear. No one will have exclusive rights. Communism is the final stage of society that would emerge from working socialism from a longer time, and ultimately will move towards classless and a stateless society. Public power will lose its political character, and ultimately a state will wither away. Rights will be determined by the rule, that is, each according to ability and each according to need. वहां पे ability and work था, यहाँ पे ability and need है. Marx believes that most of the revolutions in history have been brought for the benefit of majority. Most of revolutions in history have been brought by minorities for the benefit of minorities. But only proletariat revolution is a majority revolution for the benefit of majority. Revolution is a historical necessity and is indispensable midwife to social change. It is an effective means to transform power and bring a new epoch. All right? The proletariat will bring production into centralized system in the vast association of the whole nation. And thus, Marx is in Communist Manifesto rights, that workers of the world be united. You have nothing to lose except the chain of slavery, but you have the entire world to conquer. ऐसा डायग्राम बना देना बेटा, आउटलाइन ऑफ क्लास स्ट्रगल का भी, जैसे हिस्टोरिकल मटेरियलिज्म को बनाए, उसमें हिस्टोरिकल इफेक्ट ले लो, स्लेव एंड सोसाइटी, कंटेंडिंग क्लास ले लो, और ऐसे करके लास्ट में कम्युनिज्म पे चले जाओ. And then you go through the certain criticism and evaluation. All right? Ralph Dahrendorf, Raymond Aron, Jonathan Turner, Max Weber, all right, Sorokin. You pick up all these scholars through which the criticism of Marx could be viewed it. All right? Dialectics ka bhi criticism hoga. And that way, the critical analysis of Marx has to be talked about. All right? I'm just taking 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll begin the show. All right? So once again, I'm wishing all of you the best of luck. Thank you.